Sankalpa Prabhavan Kaman Tattva Sarvam Asesata Manasai Vendriya Gramam Viniganya Samantaha. Samantaha. Yeah. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. One should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith, and not be deviated from the path. One should abandon, without exception, all material desires born of mental speculation, and thus control all the senses on all sides by the mind. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The yoga practitioner should be determined and should patiently prosecute the practice without deviation. One should be sure of success at the end and pursue this course with great perseverance, not becoming discouraged if there is any delay in the attainment of success. Success is sure for the rigid practitioner. Regarding Bhakti Yoga, Rupa Goswami says, Utsahan Nishchaya Yat Tata Karma Prabharsana Sangatyagat Sato Vite Sadvir Bhakti Prasiddhati. One can execute the process of devotion of Bhakti Yoga successfully with full-hearted enthusiasm, perseverance, and determination by following the prescribed duties in the association of devotees and by engaging completely in activities of goodwill. This is from the Upadesha number 3. As for determination, one should follow the example of the sparrow who lost her eggs in the waves of the ocean. A sparrow laid her eggs on the shore of the ocean, but the big ocean carried away the eggs on its waves. The sparrow became very upset and asked the ocean to return her eggs. The ocean did not even consider her appeal. So the sparrow decided to dry up the ocean. She began to pick out the water in her small beak, and everyone laughed at her for her impossible determination. The news of her activity spread, and at last Garuda, the gigantic bird carrier of Lord Vishnu, heard it. He became compassionate toward his small sister bird, and so he came to see the sparrow. Well, Garuda is a bird also, right? So they're buddy here. Garuda was very pleased by the determination of the small sparrow, and he promised to help. Thus Garuda at once asked the ocean to return her eggs, lest he himself take up the work of the sparrow. The ocean was frightened at this and returned the eggs. Thus the sparrow became happy by the grace of Garuda. Similarly, the practice of yoga, especially Bhakti Yoga and Krishna consciousness, may appear to be very difficult, appear to be a very difficult job. But if anyone follows the principles with great determination, the Lord will surely help, for God helps those who help themselves. What a great saying that is. God helps those who help themselves. Yeah, you shouldn't be a lazy person or a loafer. You should try your best. And whatever is lacking, when God sees your determination, sincere determination to make spiritual advancement, He'll help you. But if you're a very lazy person, then there were two lazy men, and they were both laying down, and there was a fire that started. And one of the lazy men jumped up and started running away. But the other lazy man just turned his back to the fire. So he didn't have to look at it because he was really lazy. Okay, so text 25, which says, Sanai Saner Uparamed Budya Driti Grihitaya Atma Samstam Mana Kritva Na Kinchit Api Chintaya. Gradually, step by step, one should become situated in trance by means of transient intelligence, sustained by full conviction. And thus, the mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. That's good. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. By proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. This is called pratyahara. The mind being controlled by conviction, meditation, and cessation from the senses should be situated in trance or samadhi. At that time, there is no longer any danger of becoming engaged in the material conception of life. In other words, although one is involved with matter, as long as the material body exists, one should not think about sense gratification. One should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness. Okay, now that's a very nice verse. Gradually, step by step, one should become situated in trance by means of intelligence sustained by full conviction. And thus, the mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. And in the purport, it says, by proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. This is called pratyahara. Well, this is what the yogis are trying to do. They also practice pratyahara.
Yeah.
But their method is different than what is being mentioned here.
So Maharaj, here it's purely like what people do in meditation, like they don't think of anything, blank. That's what you're saying, that you should not think of anything else, but we always try to think about Krishna. I mean, we have been recommended to think about Krishna while chanting and even doing the meditation called mantra meditation, but we always think about Krishna, his pastimes and all those things. So this is kind of little.
Are you asking a question? What's the difference between what
so this is the difference
the Mayavadis do and what?
So this looks like more like a Mayavadi do, right? They don't think. I mean, the last line especially, which is, thus the mind should be fixed on the self alone, should think of nothing else. So it's kind of nothing. You're not thinking.
Is it a lower S or higher S? Bigger S?
What
The self.
should be on the self? Yeah. The big S. Yeah. So
Yeah,
self
yeah.
means.
Yeah. So that means it's actually the Lord. If it is a small S.
Wait a minute. Is it small S or big S?
I think it is big S in the translation. Translation, the last
Yeah,
line.
I have an older Bhagavad Gita, and it was a mistake. And I've seen in newer Bhagavad Gita it's a big S. There it is, right there.
Yeah.
It's just
Here
nice.
it is a big S also.
You got a big S?
Yeah, on the Veda base, it's a big S.
Yeah. Well, we made a
Self,
mistake in the old edition.
So the mind should be fixed on the self.
Chapter 6, text 25.
It is fine. Yeah. It's capital.
Capital S.
We should be thinking about Paramatma in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, one should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness. So it's not that we have no pleasure, but we have a particular pleasure that is in relationship with the Supreme Lord. It's not based on our body and selfish desires. And that's why it says, in other words, although one is involved with matter, as long as the material body exists, one should not think about sense gratification. One should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness. Well, instead of thinking about our own pleasure, we should focus on pleasing the Lord. If the Lord is pleased, obviously we're going to be pleased. In fact, everyone's going to be pleased. So, but if you please yourself, that's a very selfish thing. And who's going to be pleased? Well, you might be pleased for a certain period of time, but over time you'll see that your selfishness has made you, let's say, aloof from making spiritual advancement. And you'll find out that many people have made spiritual advancement and you haven't because of that selfishness. Therefore, one should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness. Haribol. So that is the solution to the problem of how to make spiritual advancement. We should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness. That includes associating uniquely with devotees. Text 26. Yato yato nischalati manas chanchalam ashiram. Ashtiram, right. Tatas tato niyam yaitad atmani eva vasam nyatyet. not yet. From wherever the mind wanders due to its flickering and unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw it and bring it back under the control of the self. Okay, this is something that we all are experiencing. The mind wandering to its flickering and unsteady nature, due to its flickering and unsteady nature. The nature of the mind is flickering and unsteady. But a self-realized yogi has to control the mind. The mind should not control him. One who controls the mind and therefore the senses as well is called Goswami or Swami. And one who is controlled by the mind is called Godasa, or the servant of the senses. A Swami knows the standard of sense happiness. In transcendental sense happiness, the senses are engaged in the service of Rishikesha, or the supreme owner of the senses, Krishna. Serving Krishna with purified senses is called Krishna consciousness. That is the way of bringing the senses under full control. What is more, that is the highest perfection of yoga practice. So this is very, very, let's say, high level understanding of Krishna consciousness. We have to bring the mind under control, because the mind that is not under control is flickering and unsteady. So, what do you do when the mind is flickering and unsteady? And there's a lot of people like that. They're very, what you would call, they're very, they can't focus the mind. It's going here and there and everywhere. It says here, the nature of the mind is flickering and unsteady. But a self-realized yogi has to control the mind. The mind should not control him. Well, that is an interesting statement, because that means that we are not the mind. If we were the mind, then there would be no question of this competition here between the mind and the self. But because we're identifying ourselves as a servant of Krishna, that the competition is broken. In other words, we're not thinking of anything else than pleasing the Lord. Therefore, the mind cannot take us away from Krishna consciousness. However, if we don't have Krishna consciousness, then the mind can control us. And because of its nature of being flickering and unsteady, then we are not able to make any tangible spiritual advancement because of that flickering and unsteady mind. One who controls the mind and therefore the senses as well is called Goswami or Swami. And one who is controlled by the mind is called Godasa, or the servant of the senses. A Goswami knows the standard of sense happiness. In other words, what's the standard of sense happiness? It's engaging the senses in the service of Krishna. That is sense happiness. A Goswami knows The standard of sense happiness and transcendence sense happiness. The senses are engaged in the service of Rishikesha, or the supreme owner of the senses, meaning Krishna. Serving Krishna with purified senses is called Krishna consciousness. That is the way of bringing the senses under full control. What is more, that is the highest perfection of yoga practice. Okay, so we don't want our minds to be chanchalam, always flickering, always going from one thing to another. That's what happens when you watch television or movies. It's going from one thing to another. And it's not, I mean, you by watching television, it will condition you to have a flickering mind, going from one thing to another. It will not help you to meditate, but it will condition your mind to be unsteady and going from one thing to another, to another, to another, and to another. It's very nice to understand these things. You know, what does the television train you to be? Well, it trains you to be a person who needs this so-called entertainment. It goes from one subject to another subject to another subject to another subject. Whereas we have to train the mind to stay focused on one thing, and that's Krishna. Now, because Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that includes everything. Krishna owns everything. Krishna is the sum total of everything. When I say sum total of everything, he controls everything. But if you ignore Krishna, then it's very difficult to control the mind. And you'll go, your mind will be basically unsteady. Or it'll become steadily focused on sense gratification. That's another type of yoga, but it's not positive yoga, it's negative yoga. When you're not focusing on God, you're focusing on sense gratification. So we have to bring the mind back from the infatuation with sense gratification and focus it on making spiritual advancement by keeping the mind focused on Krishna. So what's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? Chant Hare Krishna. What should you do in the afternoon? Chant Hare Krishna. What you should do in the evening? Chant Hare Krishna. What should be the last thing you do before you go to sleep? Chant Hare Krishna. So that means your mind is focused on Krishna, you know, morning, afternoon, evening, etc. And even in your dreams, you will always think of Krishna as you become more and more serious about chanting. Okay, so that's why it says gradually, step by step, one should become situated in trance by means of intelligence sustained by full conviction. I love that statement. Sustained by full conviction. That means it's not like you're convicted like like an outlaw or something. No, you have full conviction. That means that you have full determination. And thus the mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. Now, wait a minute. Now, does that mean you're selfish? You're only thinking of yourself? No. You are you want to save yourself from becoming confused and floating around in the world of sense gratification. You want to be able to control yourself. And therefore, your mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. So when you think of yourself always, however, it's in relationship to Krishna, not separate from Krishna, not minus Krishna. But you think of yourself in relationship with Krishna. Now you are a genuine yogi. If you think of yourself minus Krishna, you become a sense gratifier. But if you think of yourself always in relationship to Krishna, now you are a devotee. Okay, so one should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness. So, in order not to get confused by what is being said, there's a possibility to get confused because the verse says, gradually, step by step, one should become situated in trance by means of intelligence, sustained by full conviction, and thus the mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. But yet, in the purport, it says, by proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. This is called pratyahara. The mind being controlled by conviction, meditation, and cessation from the senses should be situated in trance or samadhi. At that time, there is no longer any danger of becoming engaged in the material conception of life. In other words, although one is involved with matter, as long as the material body exists, one should not think about sense gratification. One should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness. So in the verse it says, one should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. But in the purport it says, one should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness. So in order not to be confused by what's being said in the verse, you have to read the purport. Because someone will say, well, look, in the purport it says that the mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. Well, that sounds like it's selfish. But in the purport, it says that one should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness. That's why you have to read the purports to understand what is really being said in the verse. Those persons who only read the verses and not the purports, they can easily be misled. Okay, so now I think we're past our time now. So are there any questions? These are nice verses. And any questions about our people in the wide world? I should say wild
world online. Hare Krishna, Mataji's, Prabhu's, any questions online? If no questions, we do have Harinam Ecstasy series of Kirtans every night in Seattle. If you are in Seattle, you should be in Samamish Vedic Cultural Center by 8 p.m.
Explain what it is.
Yeah, it's every night. Maharaj is leading the Kirtan, and it's Harinam Kirtan. There are lots of instruments. Today, in fact, we purchased a number of percussion instruments. So Maharaj's goal is that everyone participates in this and experience the ecstasy of chanting the holy name. And it typically lasts from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. every weekday, from Monday to Friday. So please take time to be there at the Vedic Cultural Center at 8 p.m. Anything else, Maharaj, you want?
It can also be.
Yeah, of course, you can join online if you're remote and participate. It's going to be streamed on YouTube. Anything else you wanted to share, Maharaj?
Well, this is the best way to prepare yourself to take rest at night.
Yes, yes. Definitely the last 2 days, 2 nights has been really immersive, peaceful, blissful.
Mhm.
Yes. From philosophy to practice. So at 7 o'clock, the philosophy, 8 o'clock, the practice.
Haribo, that's a good statement.
So we'll see you guys all, or whoever is around. We'll see you at 8 o'clock. Hare Krishna.
Haribo.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna.